please welcome onto the stage Azeem Rafiq, Shaunaka Rishi and Mira Kaushik. So at the outset, I want to say that I don't know what soft power means, so I'm really keen to, at the end of the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so, walk away with an excellent understanding of what it is. So no pressure, but it's all down to you to explain to me and explain to the audience what the intricacies of soft power are. As far as I understand, it can mean different things to different people in different contexts. What I want to talk about today is what you feel are the biggest positives and the biggest areas for development for India's soft power. But before I do that, I'm just going to do brief introductions of each of our panelists. Shaunaka Rishi is the director of the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies. That's the leading Hindu studies centre in the world. It's been doing absolutely wonderful things. We were fortunate enough to listen to some thoughts from you earlier on in the week, where we had an education conference in Oxford as part of India Week. Azeem Rafiq is an author. He's just got a new book out, which has been doing really, really well. It's just a couple of weeks out in the bookshops, and we'll share details about that soon. He's also a podcaster, so he comes up on my Instagram feeds multiple times a day now, which he didn't do a month ago. And earlier he played cricket for England and Yorkshire. He's got a great insight, of course, into the cricketing world, but now also in business, in journalism, or rather books, publishing, and elsewhere. Mira Kaushik has, I know her in the context of running a incredible South Asian dance charity for many, many years, which she started. She's got more than 30 years of experience as an arts producer. She is an arts producer of international renown. She's won several awards, and she's always extremely recognizable by that big bindi. So that means even if there's 500 people in the room, I always know Mira is there because I can see her from across the audience. And I'm very glad that you made it today. So starting off with that initial question, soft power can mean different things to different people. In India's context, what does it mean, and what does India do well? Yeah.
Yes. I suppose one story, when Barack Obama sat in the Oval Office for the first time, he had two pictures on the wall behind him, one of Martin Luther King and one of Nelson Mandela, and both of them were declared Gandhians. And he was endorsing their political path and the values and principles behind their political path. And I began to reflect on that and think, in the 20th and into the 21st century, who has been the most influential leader in terms of leadership per se in a global context? And Gandhi keeps on coming back up. When I go to India, he's a much more nuanced character. But outside of India, he's a saint, and you can't say anything against him because he was a saint among politicians and maybe a politician among saints. But his character was considered so highly. He's had a huge influence on the planet. It's been a very quiet influence and a very soft influence, so when we talk about soft power. But for me, soft power is when you actually are in a position by influence only, nearly a process of osmosis, to affect executive decision-making on a global scale. And I think India, personally looking, I'm from Ireland, India, the political push now is for Indianization. I'm all about Irishization, obviously. But aside from the politics and the nationalism of it, India has an awful lot to offer the global community that is quintessentially Indian. and its economic power isn't Indian necessarily. The markers for that aren't Indian, they're decided elsewhere. Nuclear power is not an Indian thing. Nationalism is a German thing. Democracy is a Greek thing. So where's the Indian thing? So the markers that India is looking at to say that we are achieving, I'm not sure they're taking leadership. Well, I'm quite positive they're not taking leadership from their own heritage. And I think inherent in their heritage is enough to transform how they conduct themselves in the world and how the world conducts themselves, not only towards India, but per se. I think India has a lot to offer that it's unaware of at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, thanks for that introduction. That was nice. I think, put it simply, soft power, it's an ability to get what you want through attraction, without a payment or things like that. And I think in the Indian context, two of their biggest products, cricket and Bollywood, and how they've sort of brought them two together to create this positive image out to the international world, attract, international players where, as we talk more into it, where more or less, everyone wants to be involved in the IPL or involved in cricket around India. I think it's been an incredible journey just watching it from afar, because people look at cricket and look at, the impact India has in cricket and think that it's always been like that, but it hasn't. It's been sort of this last couple of decades where they've used the power that they have through Bollywood and cricket, combined it together to send out a more positive image and get more sort of influencers and young people attracted to the country.
In fact, in 1983, when India came to play the World Cup here, I think the team had already booked tickets to go back home much before the final, because no one expected them to stay that long. So India's come a long way.
Yeah, I mean, won the World Cup last week as well. So I think, that's been a long time, the ICC tournament. So that'll give it another boost, I think. But it is quite impressive to see from afar, how they've been able to sort of put that sport, Bollywood, and the business side together. I think the IPL now, after the NBA, per match basis, has the biggest commercial, thing compared even to the Premier League, which is pretty impressive.
Thank you, Pratik. I think about 4 or 5 years ago, we too were invited by Indian government to attend and participate in a soft power conference, if you remember. So when Pratik asked me to participate in this one, I went back to my paper and I realized that very little has changed. The only thing which sort of really has happened over the last 5 years in terms of soft power is a huge amount of rhetoric about the current government, which has been distributed globally. And we all are carriers of all that information and believe in it. And the whole idea of soft power, which exists, has been far more connected to the vote bank and diaspora rather than actually looking at the diplomacy and cultural diplomacy of the country. But I'm sorry, I went to bed at 4 a.m. today, so I've just put down a few notes on my way in here, Pratik. So obviously I belong to the cultural and creative sector, and my belief is that the civilizations are remembered for their cultural investment and heritage. India is world's largest democracy. Our global presence, thanks to our economically successful diaspora, successful IT industry, internationally loved cuisine, cinema, performing arts, sports, cricket, multiculturalism at large, yoga, Ayurveda, and philosophy. They also play a very important part. Our pluralism, maturity of democracy, following the recent elections is also a very positive aspect, I would like to believe. In the recent times, also flourishing startup ecosystem, homegrown innovations, emerging technologies, and sunrise sectors like blockchain, AI, fintech, green energy. They all play an important role in selling of our soft power. There have been few sort of really, to my memory, I was just sort of really thinking about Mr. Modi's invitation to G7 summit recently. The whole sort of really tamasha of G20 and the current government's sort of really strategic focus on Buddhism, diaspora, and yoga are also positive achievements of India. I also think of, the creation of Uttar Pradesh into a Disneyland of religion, Hindu religion, is another potential sort of positive development, but it backfired this time. So how do you do it is also sort of something very important for the Hindu community. I'm director of a Rajasthan-based boutique festival in Shekhawati. And I can see how rich traditions of art, cuisine, reinvention of, Ayurveda as a holistic regime from local Ved and traditional systems actually can really impact the ecosystem of soft power currently. Promotion of millet, Make in India, International Yoga Day, Indian film stars now sort of reaching out to Hollywood, food, cuisine, important people of Indian origin, getting important positions. They all add to our soft power.
So if I think back to 50 years ago in Britain, a British politician called Enoch Powell making a speech about rivers of blood and talking about how all the foreigners are going to come and take our jobs. Of course, until yesterday, Rishi Sunak had come and taken the top job in the country. So,
sadly, yes.
But that was done in a much more benign way. And that, I guess, is underlying what the kind of big benefits of soft power are. You can get what you want in a benign way. So you get outcomes that you prefer without needing to coerce, without needing to pay, but instead using persuasion and words. Yes. In a Netflix show called The Diplomat, a lot of which is actually filmed in the US Embassy in London, the husband of the American ambassador here, he makes a speech at what looks like Chatham House in the series. And he says, you know what, diplomacy doesn't work. Diplomacy is the art of doing the same thing again and again and again and again and expecting a different result, and it never works until it does. And then that inflection point, everything that you've done before makes it all worthwhile. And for me, that's kind of what cultural diplomacy, business diplomacy, public diplomacy, track two diplomacy, that's all about. Whether that's cricket, whether that's other sports, whether that's movies, etc. But I want to come back to you, Shaunaka, on this idea of power. So instead of using coercion, you're using persuasion and gentler methods to get what you want. Surely there are some instructive lessons in Hindu scriptures around this, in terms of how, let's say, Yudhishthira got what he wanted versus any of the opponents that he had in the battlefields. Anything that you want to share about how that aspect of diplomacy and soft power has evolved through the scriptures?
Yes, I suppose if we look at, you mentioned Yudhishthira, and Duryodhan was the other side. Duryodhan has a conversation before the battle, and he is a Duryodhanian, which is Machiavellian from India, but he was the original. So it's not Machiavellianism; it's Duryodhanism. He said that I'm a Kshatriya, I'm a warrior, and I will get what I want by any means. And he was crystal clear about his method. And it was going to be aggression, it was going to be violent, and he didn't care about anybody else. And then Yudhishthira has a conversation, and he's very conflicted. He says, I'm a Kshatriya, but I don't like this approach, and I don't want war. and I've done everything in my power to avoid war. And actually, I think the dharma, the conduct of Kshatriyas is the dharma of dogs, because they're just barking at each other until it escalates into violence. So he repudiated that. And he said that dharma is shukshma, it's subtle. And it's something that's done on a very individual basis. Now, interestingly, you look at that and you think, who's the powerful guy here? Well, it's Duryodhana's the powerful guy, the guy with the big muscles, the superhero. But it's Yudhisthira who wins the war. And I think that's part of the lesson of the Mahabharata. It's all about this battle and the consequences of this battle. And when we read the abridged edition, which is very small, the shelf is that size plus of the actual book of the Mahabharata, we leave out about 12 of the volumes of the 18 volumes where the real teachings are. And the teachings are essentially about ahimsa, minimizing your harm in the world. So Yudhisthira was following that path, and Duryodhana absolutely not. And that principle of ahimsa is absolutely universal. It's not Hindu or Buddhist or Jain or Sikh or Christian or Muslim. But when you hear it, you kind of go, yes. And that's the message of the Mahabharata. That's, you could say, soft power. But to act like that in the world, to minimize your violence, to be very careful what you say to people in case you hurt them, that conducting yourself like that, that takes a lot more energy and a lot more courage than just a knee-jerk violent reaction. So really, soft power is quite hard in real terms. And if you want to sell soft power, if you want to sell something like ahimsa, which was the basis of Gandhi's thing, which is the reason why Martin Luther and Nelson Mandela got involved with him. And Nelson Mandela came from an aggressive, violent, terrorist background and then thought, no, that's not the way. So it's very interesting to see the models, how the models work, and how change actually happens for long-term sustainable change. I'll give you one other little scriptural thing. We've all heard of Hanuman, I think, in the Ramayana. Hanuman, at one stage, is asked to go and get a herb from a mountain to save Lakshman. So he flies through the sky, he gets to the mountain, and he forgets what the herb was, but he knows it's on the mountain. So he takes the top of the mountain and brings it back. That sounds all very improbable, wonderful story. He brings it back, they take the herb, they fix up Lakshman. What happens next? All the people who've read the Ramayana, what happens next? No one can ever answer the question. It's right there in the text. He takes the mountaintop back and places it back where he found it. This is environmentalism par excellence. And there are so many examples of this. India could be an absolute world leader in environmental thought, in thought leadership for this area. So many excellent examples in the text. Ramayana, again, we look at Ram, who's an avatar, God come to earth. But who does he interact with? Hardly a human in the story. It's monkeys and bears and vultures and squirrels. And he interacts with all of them and accepts their service. And he's saying that every living being is important to me. Again, that's an environmental message. We lose it because we don't read it like that. But it's a very important soft power, we should say. But a lot of young people from every religion and culture want to hear that story. They want to have a narrative that helps them preserve the planet. And they'll take it from anywhere. And they'll take it and should take it from Christianity and Judaism and Islam and Hinduism. And I think Hinduism has an awful lot to offer. Just in that space, that's such an important space now. And this is a soft power that India has, and it doesn't realize. It's not researching its own texts in the academy in India. This is happening outside of India. So this is an area of real need for improvement, where India can offer tremendous thought leadership to the world from texts that are hundreds of, if not thousands of years old.
Why doesn't it happen in India? Why Oxford?
Why Oxford? Well, Oxford has the best educational karma.
Why not Nalanda? Why not Ayodhya? Why not
Yeah.
other places in India?
It's just unfortunate. At independence, it was decided, I think erroneously, that the educational system should teach no religious tradition at all. You would think that in the Indian context, it would be quite the reverse, that you would teach every and investigate every religion, every philosophy, every worldview. That is the gist of all the Indian texts, all Indian literature. But they went another way. Consequently, for the last 80 years, there hasn't been an academic study or an educational study of Hinduism. Hinduism is more than religion, but it's philosophy, it's history, it's arts and aesthetics and drama and prose. It's multidisciplinary. But to take out the religious aspect, it disables the tradition from understanding itself and from the people from understanding themselves. So the idea of pluralism begins to wane. Nationalism can come up very easily because there isn't a vocabulary to discuss the subject, because there isn't an intellectual vocabulary in the country. So when you have a discussion about Hinduism, it's nationalist Hinduism or Marxist-Leninist Delhi-wallahs, as they call them, Delhi intellectuals, firing at each other, and everyone in the middle is trying to keep their head down. So when I go to India and I say Hindu studies, people go, ooh, it's kind of... And that's actually just a bit weird, and that's because of a lack of an educational basis. And it's something that we've, from Oxford, have started to engage with Indian universities at their request to begin to help develop Hindu studies. And our thing, of course, is you can't study Hinduism in isolation. You need to do religious studies per se. But we can certainly help with Hindu studies to look at it as an academic subject, to look at it critically and examine it, and it's up to that examination. We've been doing it in Oxford for 28 years successfully, and we have fellowships where we bring Indian scholars over to Oxford to show them this is what you can do in India. And I would hope and I would envision that, you know, within a generation there will be centers of Hindu studies in India that will be world-renowned research centers for those areas. Oxford will only be a part of a network.
I want to pick up on two things that you mentioned. One on the vocabulary, but then going back to right at the start, you said that the real leadership lessons are from the parts of the text that actually we don't see. If you read a Chitralekha comic, it doesn't include most of the volumes of the Mahabharata. And you mentioned leadership is about courage, but then also resilience. And when you were saying that, I did have a question that I wanted to follow up with Azeem and Mira, but then I changed my mind because, so I've known Azeem for a couple of years now, and super nice guy, very soft-spoken, wouldn't say boo to a goose, but his journey over the last couple of years has actually been defined by those leadership traits, so the courage and the resilience. So for those of you who don't know his background, and if you want to, you can expand on it, but Azeem has been at the forefront of leading diversity and inclusion change within the cricket profession in the UK. Spoken at parliamentary committees, suffered a lot of backlash as a result, and has therefore had to emigrate as a result as well. His book is called It's Not Banter, It's Racism. And while Shaunaka was talking about Hindu texts, Azeem, I wonder if you can reflect on some of those learnings around the leadership lessons that you've had. Of course, you captained cricket teams, so you were clearly a leader from a young age. But also those lessons in courage and resilience that you learned, and how that feeds into the soft power that you feel, the social capital that you feel you've built up.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a learning experience for me last few years. You know, I had an interview around my new business, and I got asked a question about whether I suffered racism while being involved in cricket, and I got a bit emotional, and I shared a little bit. Little did I know that would end up with, you know, me giving evidence in the Parliamentary Select Committee with, you know, live practically all over the world, and that changed my life over that, you know, hour and 45 minutes. But from there, you know, it was very important for me that it actually came to something positive, and I've been very fortunate to be, you know, be able to work with corporates around these issues, because I think it's the issue of our time. A lot of corporates, when you speak to them, there's a lot of mental health challenges within a workplace. A lot of challenges around what does representation, diversity, inclusion looks like. We just talked about Rishi Sunak and how in the UK specifically, very much representation is seen as a solve to every problem, and it doesn't quite work out like that. So, it's been a learning experience, and through that, I've been able to work with some leaders and look at some things that really work. But the one thing that keeps shining out is actually, and it goes back to a little bit that was mentioned earlier, how we're not actually dealing with situations and we're trying to get around it through this sort of so-called soft power, and projecting this image that not necessarily is reality. And I think our post-COVID world, people are looking for a lot more authenticity. People are seeing through the sort of what's being projected to us and wanting to get more into actually what the reality is. And I think that is the challenge over the next decade, whether it's internationally, whether it's for India, Pakistan, the UK. I think this is something leaders need to grapple with and get understanding on it very quickly, because the way we brought up around leadership is like, pump your chest out, the loudest person's the leader, and actually our young people of tomorrow, that's not what they're interested in, and that is actually not what leadership is. And a lot of times, they're having that role, that position, you forget that actually you're supposed to be serving the people, and you're supposed to be representing someone's voice somewhere. And I think that redefining of leadership is something I've learned over the last few years. And if you are in a position where you are leading, I would encourage you to sort of try and break away from the traditions and start looking into it a bit more.
In fact, what explains part of the change, at least part of the change in today's election results, is the fact that a lot of politicians in the UK forgot that they were public servants first, through all the scandals that we've seen and through all the missteps across all parties. So just picking up on what you said about authenticity, Mira, I want to come to you, that within the cultural diplomacy space, whether that's South Asian arts, whether that's other things you're involved in, is some of it actually less about authenticity, more about image and PR, like Azeem said, and not so much about having that real conversation about underlying issues?
I think image and PR are part of the game. You have to ensure that, you mentioned my sticker on my forehead. And I might have started sort of really wearing it for a specific aesthetic reason, because I thought I looked good in it. But eventually, it ended up becoming a flagship of my identity and then the cause I was working with. So I sort of have very happily and very shamelessly sort of really, used my my sticker, my bindi, my potu or tika, whatever you call it, to promote South Asian dance, where I worked for years. So I think PR in marketing is very important, and the marketing of India in the recent years has not been very effective to the world at large. The whole of the marketing has been very much India-centric, diaspora-centric. And so diplomats have been working sort of really on one level with the foreign offices. And then there is a huge, which is great, which is good. But I think when I was just thinking of Mark Twain on my way to this place, and we are a cradle of civilization. But then how do we sort of really swing our cradle, and how do we sort of really, what we do with this cradle is another sort of really another issue. So how do we communicate our culture, value and policies to the world? And how can we convert the harsh messages which are coming out of India into the soft power? Because currently that is something which is the aggression of the establishment hasn't really worked well for them. So I think for smart and strategic communication, we need to really do few things, and some of the ideas are here that I think India needs a channel at par with BBC. Currently, people living outside India only have access to NDTV, and whatever sort of we have heard has shaped our views about India and the media. So it's very, so the communication is very inward looking rather than outward. Brand India in millennials' language through social media, films. We need sophistication and new ideas in communication which can be, which can sort of adapt and innovate. I was thinking of South Koreans, their experience of investment in art and culture, Chinese communities' desire to overshadow with their promotion of tourism, art and literature. Britain has sort of done fabulously well with this language which I'm speaking. I'm a Hindi speaker, but English is the biggest result of the British soft power. French, do we ever think of promoting Hindi at par with French and English? Japanese are great in sort of promotion of youth culture. Italians sort of promote art and culture. I think we also sort of need to kind of have an internal, unified, private and public sort of really communication between private and public entities. I've realized that within Indian government, ministries don't talk to each other. And they do whatever they can. And I think there needs to be kind of really a unified effort amongst these ministries to the cause of Indian soft power. While we are doing all of this, we also need to look at the staff which is delivering all of these ambitions. Because Indian government takes care of the top bureaucrats, but the guys whom you meet have no training or very little training. So there needs to be kind of really, I've heard that there has been a change with Mr. Modi's new sort of really initiative. But I was thinking of the Great Britain campaign which happened about 5-6 years ago where you suddenly, there was so much of buzz about the British soft power, something to sort of really, and then from my world, setting up of national performing arts companies which go out and sell India's culture and talk about it. It needs to be done professionally.
So India has the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, which is India's equivalent of the Goethe Institute, British Council, Confucius Institutes, etc., etc. And that's been around for several decades. Is that the kind of channel you think for promoting India's cultural diplomacy? Or do you think, as you alluded to earlier, you talked about there needs to be a bit more coordination between government and private sector and individuals. Do you think that impetus actually should come from diaspora groups, corporates, etc.? And the reason why I ask that is, again, you're a born diplomat, so you said it in such a nice nuanced way, and I'm going to say it in less of a nuanced way to steer the conversation. I think underlying some of what you were saying is that India today, when it projects itself outside in terms of its diplomacy, it's much more about being a strongman, much more about nationalism, rather than figuring out what India wants to achieve from its soft power over a 50-year period. So going back to what the Duryodhan version of projecting oneself, Shaunaka was talking about, the nationalism is much more about what I want next quarter, next year. I want to impose myself and achieve a particular outcome in the short term. Whereas what you seem to be saying is actually, let's think about where you want to be in 30 or 40 or 50 years. And that's much more about systemic change, which is also what Azeem has been involved in, that kind of systematic change in an organization that's very slow to move. So do you think ICCR and governments are the way to go to promote some of these things? Or do you think it's private sector, arts funding, etc.? Do you think it's diaspora groups? And if you think it's all three, what's the magic formula for all three of them working together?
ICCR, once I had experience of working with ICCR, I was in Delhi. I asked my assistant to write an email to the office and request for a meeting. So about 10 days later, I realized there was no response. So I was passing by Azad Bhavan, and I sort of dropped by. And I went to the director's PA and said, I'm just passing by. We have written an email to you and haven't heard from you. So he went on his computer, looked around, and then said, oh, Meera Kaushik obey. Obey. I thought in my head, haan be. So I said, yes, I am Meera Kaushik Obey. Can you please give me a date? And then I just thought, this man needs to be taught how to behave. And that is something which sort of really, I'm not saying that everybody at ICCR was like that, but just sort of really basic training to communicate and behave themselves was something which I realized was missing. Now, ICCR is, it's an independent sort of, it's set up, but connected to Foreign Office. So there's always someone who is, who has a career break, who is posted in India, gets a job, a senior officer of Foreign Service, and this officer sort of, treats this job as a bit of a holiday. They have about 38 centers around the world who are funded.
I want that job. If every day is a holiday, I want that job. Can you hook me up?
Yes, even I want one. So these centers sort of do whatever comes their way through government policies. So there is no time and space for creative freedom. There's no training. I've met few diplomats who were directors of the local center who were embarrassed for the job they got because they didn't want to do it, but they just got that portfolio. So there is no focus for the culture as such. And that is the story of everyone who's serving culture in India, because most of the bureaucrats are hired, or they are working for different ministries who come to work for culture, from Culture Ministry to ICCR. ICCR again then has many centers around the country. So it is also seen as a lottery for the local artist to go for foreign trips. And they may maybe write, and then who knows whom. Is there a ministerial kind of push happening? Their favorite artists. Anyone and everyone turns up outside India. They are promoting India. But how they are promoting, are they the right people to promote India? That's a question, and how they are marketed and where they are promoting and whom they are, performing to.
Shaunaka?
Just in regards to that, I was just thinking, if we look at the biggest current influence that India has on the world in terms of soft power is yoga. Everybody's doing yoga. Executive decision makers all over the world are doing yoga. And they're all investigating it and saying namaste to each other. And, so it's tremendous soft power. Who makes the money out of it? Going back to Azeem, talking about Bollywood and cricket, they've got it down to make money out of it. But going back to Meera's thing, that so who exported yoga? Well, people just came and saw it and started to practice it and started to make up their own yogas. And, so it's got a life of its own. And everything about Indian culture has been like that for generations. That's the gist of the culture, coming from a scriptural basis, and the gurus and the ashrams, and it's all about this kind of individual creativity. So to put it down to a government department or a government outreach program or something like that is never going to work anyway, because the fact is this influence is already out there and doing its thing. And India has so much more to offer in that field alone, and it's unfortunately unconscious of the need or the contribution it can make. Mindfulness is another thing that came out of India, basic meditation technique, and it's taken over the world of therapy, and very productively so. And I think there's a lot more like that, and it's just who's investigating it and who's willing to do something with it. And it's kind of funny that cricket, it's not an Indian thing. It's become an Indian thing. It's become more Indian than English, it seems. But it's so interesting how it goes both ways. So India is now exporting back to people what got to them and redefining it. So India has that capacity. It has that ability to do it. It's always had that. It has so much to offer itself and so many ways to integrate things and then regurgitate them in its own understanding. And I think it's not about capitalism, or we don't have to make a market out of it. We can actually make a contribution to the world. But I think that this can be done, and it can be done very effectively, very efficiently, very systematically, and very strategically. It's just no one's thinking like that at the moment. And unfortunately, I have interacted with the ICCR, and they're wonderful people, but they're very limited because of their political agenda, necessarily so. And I understand that. So it's not the natural vehicle for the big impact that India could make.
I say this only half jokingly, but probably Lululemon and Sweaty Betty have done more for yoga, and venture capital firms in California have done more for yoga than most other people around the world. Yeah. But one of the differences I see between, let's say, the success of IPL versus some of this conversation around the ICCR is private capital and incentives being aligned properly. So it's great to talk about culture, but unless you give people what they want and package it in the way that they want it, that transition isn't going to be made from something that is historically important, etc., into something that people want to consume. So Azeem, I want to come to you. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left in the session, so some quick thoughts from you and then from the other two panelists. What explains the success of something like the IPL and all the associated cricket that's cropped up out of it? Because that really is one of India's strongest soft power exports.
Yeah, I think the population, the economy, really. The broadcast in sports, a lot of the revenue, the money comes from the TV. And actually, the number of people that are watching in India, naturally just makes it more profitable than anywhere else in the world. But as I said earlier, they've combined and made a package and made a product that everyone wants to be part of. And actually, you're at a point now where you've just mentioned it there, where the power has shifted so far, and the oppressed becoming potentially an oppressor, and they're at that stage where they're sort of, with their power, with power comes responsibility, and they're at that stage now where how are they going to impact and leave a legacy for the game? Because this World Cup that's just gone, the timings when the matches would be on were all sort of worked for the Indian audience, and actually.
Even the location of the semi-final.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing because actually India, a lot of the other teams, and that's where I'm a little bit like this with this, because actually I quite like the way India stands up in a cricket sense to an England and Australia, because they're not used to it, they don't like it. So there's a lot of anti-Indian rhetoric in that. But actually the World Cup, this is where India does give back, because a lot of them timings makes the ICC and the game more money, which gets spread out across the game for everyone else, really. They don't need it. the IPL brings them enough money. So, and they do play a lot of the smaller nations, which again, spreads it out. But if they can handle that power with a bit more responsibility, I think that will give them more soft power than they've got currently from the game. Because I think they're at that point now where a lot of people are starting to get like, oh well, India's just controlling the game, which they are. There's no elephant in the room. It's just a straight fact. And if they can get that with a bit more of a in a diplomatic way and a bit more think of the wider picture, I think it'll help the country as a whole around the world, because they've got the economic powers and the ability to be able to sort of, bring West Indies cricket back into, cricket. Sri Lanka, I think they've been massively supportive
Zimbabwe.
of Afghanistan. They've been massively supportive of Afghanistan, which has been great to see. Zimbabwe, and the wider the game grows, I think their image to the world is going to grow bigger in a more positive manner.
So some closing remarks from all the panelists. So the first session of the day was around the next 5 years and what to expect. So quick thoughts from starting from this side of the panel through to Mira at the end. In terms of soft power, how do you think India should project itself in the next 5 years? What is your wish list of what India could do more of, or better, or maybe even less of?
Yeah, that's a list. I'll just say one thing. It's my field, but it's kind of obvious. Education, to broaden the education, to broaden the choice for education. Education has been channeled in India, where it's not education anymore, it's training to pass exams. And the idea of education, of helping people learn how to think for themselves by feeding them with knowledge, has fallen by the wayside. And that's the essence of Indian education in its natural form. So it's adopted another system, it's created another system. And we can say, oh, it's the English educational system. It's not. It's been transformed in India. And it's about achievement, and achievement now for wealth creation. So it's got to the stage where, at a meeting at AIMS in Delhi, talking to the director, his concern is that people are becoming doctors as an occupation, not a vocation. They're doing it just to make money. It's not about the care of people. That's kind of serious. So I think if India begins to educate itself about itself, look into its own heritage, begin to understand that you have to be educated about your own heritage to establish your identity in the world. Otherwise, the identity you're establishing is a pastiche, it's a facade, it's PR, and it's not going to be helpful, because people will see through it very quickly. And it's just, oh, you're a wannabe American, or you're a wannabe British, or that's just not good enough. People aren't impressed with that, as Azeem has said. People are looking for something real. So who are you? Let's look at the American model, the English model, but let's look at the Indian model for what it is and what it says as an educational opportunity, as a choice. And it's the government's responsibility to give people that choice. And I think to develop the educational system, develop it out like that, would be a tremendous gift to the country, because it helps people in the country identify themselves clearly in an Indian, in a global context, and then be able to perform at that level and make a real contribution from an Indian heritage.
Azeem or Mira?
Yeah, again, I'll put it into the sporting context. I feel like there's a real nice base, and it's not just cricket. Football's been growing, and I think there's a real nice base. It's just now trying to make it a bit more authentic, and looking at, specifically from a cricket point of view, is just right. How can we help the rest of the world, and really solidify what they already have? Because I don't think anyone is going to get anywhere near competing economically. No, IPL is the biggest thing, and it's only going to grow. But can they take a softer approach to how they, soft power, right? Be a bit softer with how they, export the game out to everyone else. And I know there's conversations right now with Saudi in how they collaborate together, and that'll be interesting. But I think if they can do more for some of the smaller nations, I think that'll, spread the message that they really want to grow the game, as opposed to just keep it closed off to themselves.
So last thoughts from you, Mira, before we go for lunch.
Yes, I think that first of all, the strategy should be joining of the dots for Indian government to see what else is happening, and use everything to its benefit. I worked for Indian performing arts forever, but I was part of the British scene. And then Indian government, because I was not promoting India, didn't bother about it. I was working in a very focused and strategic manner. And I think we need to be focused and strategic. Do less, but with far more, now, we are reaching 80th anniversary, though we have 100 years worth of vision from the Prime Minister. But then how are we really weaving the idea of Vikasit Bharat, which was a big agenda. It is an agenda, how it is filtering through. Do fewer things better, and also we have to remember that soft power needs to match the hard power. Then only it's effective. Otherwise, nobody cares about it.